Okay, I think this is where. Okay, so as usual, I just have some like gameplay footage in the background of some Hades that I played. So it's not gonna have anything to do with what I'm talking about, but just so no one gets bored or anything, listen to me drone on about this. So so I was looking at the Mahler subreddit, and someone made a thread about the Acolyte, and I wasn't aware that it was already out. I thought it was like another day or two. I'm not really paying that much attention to stuff like that. So anyways, someone made a thread that the show was good, so I popped in and I decided to read what they wrote. And then I saw, and they were pretty positive about it, right? And then like I saw another comment, like, or and then like the first comment was like, I watched 5 minutes of it and I thought it was shit. So I was like, well, I can watch the first 5 minutes of it and judge for myself. So I went and found it and put it on, and I think this is like a tough one to call. um, I think I'm overall leaning towards that this show is not going to be very good. Like when it's all said and done. But I think the first two episodes have like enough kind of going for them and are like somewhat of a decent enough departure from things like The Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett and Obi-Wan and even Ahsoka. Like the kind of tone and like kids gloves that it feels those shows are always wearing. This one doesn't really have that as much. It's more close to like Andor in terms of kind of like tone and like overall vision for um the Star Wars universe and kind of like like examining this galaxy in more ways than just going to Tatooine, right? Like um, it actually looks like the people that made it, like Star Wars, and are trying to make it look good, and they're trying to make some stuff that can kind of hold up to the standards of today. So I'd say the production's very good, the actors are very good for the most part, and the sets look good. The way that it's kind of like edited and the pace and the tone of it all feels very Star Warsy. Um, I would say that my issues with it and kind of like the flaws. Well, okay, like hold on. Let me. I'll try and be as fair as I can be here without going right into the flaws or whatever. Because like, let me think of like, what do I like about this show? Which I guess is kind of a weird thing because I didn't even care to watch this show. But like I said, like I guess it wasn't. I watched both episodes, right? So it wasn't like bad enough to turn off. But it's still like not really what I want to see from Star Wars, and I'll elaborate on that in a sec. But let me think what I liked about it. So, um, it had it has more like people in alien prosthetics and stuff like that. So I guess that's kind of cool. Like they're generally like humanoid people with just like face paint on, so it's never really like that much more meaningful than they're kind of like a different color, like their head looks weird. Their race never seems to provide them with any kind of like tangible benefit, like, oh, he's a, you know, whatever. I mean, like, I was going to say Wookiee because it's the only Star Wars thing I can think of, but people kind of know what Wookiees do. But you know what I mean? Like that guy in the Obi-Wan show that was like the leader of the Sith, and people were like, "Oh, he's gonna be fine because he has like four stomachs or whatever." Like you just that's it. That's what's cool about those guys. Is they have four stomachs. Like they can never do anything like cool. It's not like they can like breathe other kinds of atmosphere or they can like digest like plastic or metal in a way that might be useful. They never like actually do anything like outside of just being like a different color. So it's kind of a superficial compliment. Um, I like Master Saul. He seems pretty cool so far. He seems like a pretty decent and compelling character. And I like his actor. The other characters are kind of flat right now. There just really hasn't like been enough with them yet. And not May, but Osha seems to be. I did like on the spaceship where she like saved the guy, um, and he kind of like stole her escape pod. I like it less because that just like puts her in a situation where she sits in a spaceship that crashes and then like survives it, which is stupid. Um, because presumably like the spaceship would have crashed and everyone would have been fine, right? Like I guess I don't know. It just kind of like undercuts. But the fact that she had pause of like going into the escape pod and then like stopped to help the guy, that like doesn't go unnoticed. That's a thing. That was um and I also like that she tried to use the force and it didn't just like work or whatever. That was kind of nice. Um but that kind of might be where things stop and start. I guess I also appreciate the fact that like the show is going out of its way to like feature a lot of locations, and the locations so far have like been pretty cool. So that's good as well. So there's like a couple things that are annoying about this show. It's kind of contrived in certain areas, which isn't like the end of the world. Like Andor has some contrivances and stuff, and it's kind of fine. Um, but these are annoying nonetheless. It's like earlier, like I said, she's like in a spaceship that's crashing, and she like gives up her escape pod to some other guy, and that kind of like dooms her to just like crash with the ship. But then she like survives it anyways. And then when the Jedi get to the crash site to like look for her body or look for any survivors, like the first thing they say, like literally the first thing they say as they get there is nobody could have survived this. And so that kind of stuff is just like, so why did you write it that way? Like I mean, and there's a few times where uh, things like that kind of happen. So maybe they're kind of like small or like nitpicky, but it does like it still is like enough that like when I'm watching it, I have to stop and think about it. Like I notice enough that I have to think about it. So the big thing that like I have an issue with is that this show is like it's simultaneously like using the force not enough and too much. Um, and what I mean by that is that they're like everyone in this show is like a fucking force user pretty much. Like Saul, his Padawan, Yar, the black guy, I don't know what his name. Yurt, it starts with a Y. May, um, Osha, the Green Lady, um, presumably the Jedi's that are at the temple, and Torben. So like all these people are like using these are all like force sensitive people, and they all use the force. And like I don't think that this is a radical or controversial thing to say, but I'm pretty sure that like people that have the force probably come off to people with the force differently than people that don't have it, right? Like if you run into like if you pass like 100 people on the street as a like you use the force, right? Like I'm Obi-Wan Kenobi. I'm walking down the street and I pass 100 people. If one of those people have the force or is a Jedi, I feel like I'd be able to know and they'd also be able to know about me. That's always been kind of my understanding of the force, right? Is that they can kind of like detect each other and they can feel like disturbances and things of that nature. And so the problem with this force or sorry, the problem with this show like employing uses of the force so much is like dude, I just don't believe that like this lady is like using the force to like slip a knife down her wrist and into her palm without the other Jedi doesn't notice that. I'll do you one better. I don't believe that somebody can walk into a bar with revengeous intent, uh, kind of kind of come in to the bar in a really weird way, like they didn't enter like a normal person. Then they don't do the normal thing, right, which is like walk up to the bar and order a drink or partake or whatever. They come in alone, right? uh, and then immediately starts like just I don't know. She just seems sus like right off the bat. And these are things that you'd think that like before that person even like got through the door, like the Jedi would be able to sense that like someone in the area is amiss. That there are they're like extra angry or whatever, and she's like a Sith, which like the well she I mean they haven't called her a Sith yet, right? But she's like essentially like a dark user or like at least a Jedi with kind of like bad intentions or evil intentions or something along those lines. Is this like am I crazy? Is this like not something that like would like differentiate her from other people? Like at least like alert her to like other Jedi? Like I don't profess to be the biggest like Star Wars fan or whatever, but like I was always under the impression that like the Jedi can like sense each other. Um, unless they're like trying really hard to like suppress their powers or something like that. Um, but I feel like that has to kind of be like explicitly stated or um so yeah, that's kind of like my issue with the show because the first fight with Osha, no, sorry, with May and Lara, I don't remember her name. Carrie Ann Moss's character, Trinity's character. So Trinity and May are fighting, and May is just like she's just doing all this like she's just like doing all this stuff that like requires your mind and like requires you to use the force. And I just like don't believe that like Trinity can't tell that like oh her mind is now focused on like other things, Like this is kind of like a bigger issue is that like the light side users and the dark side users are supposed to have like pros and cons to like why they chose that side, right? Like the the dark side is supposed to give you like raw power while like the light side gives you more balance and control, right? Um and so when if all we're gonna do is show like light side and dark side users just doing the same thing, like just using telekinesis and not really any more than that, then you're kind of just like homogenizing the force, and it's not really like that interesting. Like I always assume that because like light side users are more about balance and they're more in control and they're kind of more like focused and in tune with the force that they're like better at like detecting it. It works better for them as kind of like a defensive system or like an alarm system because they don't have like raw power. So they kind of like get an advantage by being really prescient and kind of being able to foresee like what's going to happen. Isn't that the idea behind like Anakin and Obi-Wan like fighting at the end of Revenge of the Sith on Mustafar is that like their fights are so like they look so fluid and they look so choreographed because like both of the Jedis are like they're like reading each other and like predicting what the next strike is going to be, and so therefore they're like preemptively like blocking it and so isn't that like what that's all about? So yeah, so I just find this like incredibly frustrating. Like every time I'm watching like an action scene or just scenes of people like using the force, um, it's really it really bugs me. And then the show has also already shown that it's willing to be selective with it, or it's at least willing to like employ these rules to like the smallest degree that it can with like getting away with some of like the arbitrary bullshit. So like what I mean by that is when they in episode 2 when they go to the Jedi temple that Master Torben is in, he's like in stasis, right? And then the Jedi will show up. So it's Saw and Yort and the Padawan and May. No, Osha. God. And there's like two other Jedi that are like outside the temple. Now maybe those guys aren't Jedi, but I assume that anyone in a Jedi temple is a Jedi. And we also are like living in an era where there's like tons of Jedi. Like everyone is a Jedi, it looks like. So I just assume they were Jedi. Now I know they don't have like the yellow fucking robes on or whatever that the like main characters have, but they're from like Coruscant and from like a bigger order and stuff like that. So forgive me for making the assumption that these fucking regular ass guys are just Jedi, but like I assume that they're Jedi. So in my eyes, there's 5 Jedi in this scene, right? 6 if you include Osha, but she's like dormant. So we won't include her, right? So that means we have the 2 guys that work at the temple. We have Saul, we have Yort, and we have Padawan. 5 Force users, they're all there. And in the other room with Torben is is May, and she's like trying to poison and like assassinate him. And I just don't get how 5 fucking light side users they can't detect not one another force user, and two specifically like an evil force user. Um, like I just don't buy for a second that like May doesn't give off a different kind of like force aura or force signal than like other Jedi, right? Because she's got like evil intent. Like she's literally motivated by revenge, and I think it's pretty safe to say that all the other characters that we've seen so far, the Jedi specifically, are not really like motivated by anything. Um, especially revenge. So you think that the fact that she's motivated by revenge would be like a giant tell in like the way that like the force is like broadcasted from her or whatever, what have you. Um, so anyways, I don't get why they can't detect her. And then when Torben breaks the stasis that he's been in for 10 years, you think that would be like a huge like everyone would feel that with the force, right? Like not everybody, but all the people in the scene that I'm describing, like the 5 Jedi. You think that they'd be like, "Oh man, I think I just detected that like Torben like woke up." Cuz uh, I mean, like am I crazy for thinking that? Like that just seems like a really like mundane consequence of something like that. Especially because he's like supposedly because he's been in this stasis for 10 years, right? Not eating or drinking or anything else. That the force is probably like doing something to him, right? That allows him to maintain that, status, be in that, the way that he is, right? Like, does this sound crazy? So when he comes out of it, that should be like, holy fucking shit, dude. Like every Jedi in like a mile radius should be able to tell that like he came out of stasis. So, but then, then Saul finally convinces the 2 other Jedi to like lead them to Torben. So then they're like walking down the hall, and then this is like the most dumb and like contrived shit. Also, right? Is like they're walking down the hall, and then Osha sees like a vision of her sister like running down like a different corridor, and she just goes and follows it. She doesn't say anything. She doesn't say like, "Hey guys, like like just come follow me." Like just don't ask questions, just follow me. Like I'm yeah. She doesn't say any of that. She just fucking leaves. By the way, she's like in captivity slash like a fugitive slash she's like she's in like custody of these Jedi. Like the fact that they're being like friendly with her and they don't like have her in like handcuffs and stuff like that doesn't change the fact that like she's like under their jurisdiction or like in their custody, or if she wasn't with them she'd be in a way worse situation, like probably behind bars or something like that, right? So she can't just like run off. That's not something that they should all like not take notice of, and like clearly they don't all not take notice of it. Yort or whatever like notices her, but I mean they should all fucking like that's just crazy to me. um so anyways, she disappears down the corridor, and then they show Saul like detecting a disturbance in the force, and it's because he realizes that like Torben is dead. So it's like, so you can I don't get why the show is so. Why does it have to be so fucking conveniently selective? Like, why can't you guys just write this stuff with that in mind? Like, the show would be so much better if you had to show the Jedi and the Sith, like, concealing themselves around each other. Or, like, if the Jedi had this prescience that I'm like describing, it would be so much more cool to see someone have to play around that, think around that, strategize around it. I can't do this without, because like they'll detect this or they'll do that. So I need to create like lots of distractions in like other places to like draw their. There's nothing interesting like that. Like May will just like show up, like like her and her buddy will like take over a business and nobody will notice, and she'll just walk around in the same clothes every planet that she goes to. She assassinates everyone in the exact same outfit. She's the only one, by the way, that like when she's walking around, she's the only one that wears a mask and a hood. When she's like walking around on whatever the planet is that Torben's on, I don't remember, Udama or something like that. I don't remember all the names. Um, like when she's walking through the streets and she like first goes to the apothecary to like meet her friend when he's asleep, like when she's walking through the streets, she's literally the only person with a face mask on. No one else has one on. So you'd think that that is like, I mean, I'm not saying people are going to stop her on the street for wearing a face mask or whatever. That's stupid. But like, you'd think people would take note. It's like clearly not like part of the normal ensemble here of like everyday people. And she's also got like the cloak on. And so that's like a little bit silly. There's just some things like that in the show that it just feels like I don't know if you could necessarily say that like corners were cut when people aren't aware of things like this like in the first place. Maybe they were aware of the force thing and they just didn't want to deal with it, and so they're like fuck it, like just no one can detect people unless we like need them to, and we'll just keep it like that. And all I'm saying is that it shows. And I think that they kind of like miss the fundamental, like you can't keep taking these IPs that are built on the backs of nerds and then like taking out all the nerd stuff. Like I said that like I found that fucking post on the Baller subreddit. So like I'm a fan of EFAP. They literally just did a fucking 12 and a half hour podcast talking about like different comic book characters and movie characters and shit like that, like fighting each other. That's like what nerds like get off on, is like just like dissecting all the fucking minutia of how all this shit works and like really finding out like what would be better than what, or how this kind of scenario would play out, or if these two people met each other, like what would happen based on like the things that they have, you know. So when you make these shows and like none of the characters and like none of the fantasy and world building and stuff like that is adhering to like those small kind of things, you lose a lot of like the magic that you guys are so fucking desperate to catch, Disney. You think like, oh, well, all we have to do is like put Star Wars back on screen, put droids and X-wings and Darth Vader and shit like that back on screen, and it's like, no, like the reason that like these characters, like not every character has to be like a fucking home run, right? Like Star Wars has some mundane characters, but the reason that you go back to see it is because there you want to be back in that world. Like who else can I meet from that world that might also be cool or does a thing that I've never seen before, right? It doesn't always have to be the same people doing the same fucking thing. Your property has to be compelling and interesting enough that like I want to be there even when I'm not with like my favorite people that you've showed me. I think like Furiosa is kind of like a good example of that, where people might have problems with that movie or whatever, but I enjoyed myself because I got to be back in the wasteland and I got to see more of kind of like how Morton Joe acts and how he organizes things, and like slight other glimpses into the Citadel and how they deal with outsiders and like what outsiders might even be like. And even small things like seeing Gastown and it having like a big moat of like oil, even though I heard someone say that's pretty dumb because if it ever lit on fire, that like fucks everything up. But like whatever, it looks cool. It like gives character to the world. And a lot of times, it's gonna be too cool for me to think of the dumb thing later. And even when I realize that thing is dumb later, like I still, who cares? Like it's cool as fuck. Like I don't give a shit that like you can light that moat on fire. It's cool as fuck that Gastown is encircled by like a giant moat of gas and there's a drawbridge over it. It makes it very distinct from the Citadel. And it makes it very distinct from the bullet farm, which we see later. So and like this show does like crazy like more egregious things than that, like have someone crash from fucking orbit and survive, and then have people show up there and say like they couldn't have survived, right? Like I'd rather have something like a moat that could be lit on fire than some bullshit like someone crashing from outer space and surviving, and then people showing up there and being like, there's no way anyone could have survived this, she's dead. um so it's like you kind of like pick your poison in these situations, but like that's just how I see it or whatever. So yeah. So after two episodes, I think that this show is like um so like in my opinion, of all the stuff that Disney has made, right? Like the best thing is Andor, and then there's like a massive gulf between whatever the next thing would be, and I don't even know what it is. It might be like Rogue One. Um, so I guess the goal wouldn't be like massive, but it's probably still pretty big. Um, damn, I forgot that it's Rogue One. Shit. Man, because I was gonna say that like I think as a okay, so this is not what I think, but I was going to say this, but now I have to refigure. But I'll let you in on like what I was going to say was that I think that the Acolyte would slot in between Andor and like whatever the next best Disney thing is in terms of quality. But now that I've thought about it for a sec and realized that the next best thing is probably Rogue One, I don't think this show is better than Rogue One. So it probably sits between Rogue One and whatever the next best thing is. And that's only as far as episode 2. Like I think that by the time that this show is over, and especially with some of the like rumors that I've seen about like what it might inextricably do to the canon, we could see this show fall like really, really far in people's estimations. But I think right now, as far as like the production goes, as far as like it feels like it definitely feels more cohesive and thought out and has a direction compared to some of the other stuff. Like, even though I don't like some of the shortcuts that they're taking for, the plot, um, like, oh no, Osha's on a ship and then she's gonna escape, but then she doesn't because she's a good person. But then there's no consequences anyway. Even though it's got stuff like that, there is still like some purposeful stuff being done. I feel like the person that like all the people that helped write it and stuff, I feel like they kind of have a good idea of like where they ultimately want it to go and like what they kind of ultimately want the message and stuff to be. And so that's kind of nice. Like you can definitely kind of feel that it's got legs and those legs are like taking it somewhere. Rather than the legs being all like floopy and just kind of walking around and spinning in circles and not really like going very far, which is what like a lot of the other shows kind of feel like to me. Um, so yeah. Um, I don't know. Like, I guess will depend on. I don't know how many episodes this thing is gonna be, and I guess it'll kind of depend on like what the next one is. But they're gonna go into like a weekly release, and that's probably not that smart because like the stuff isn't like that good that like you need to turn in for it every week. It really like I know that everyone is like moved away from the binge model because they want it to like trend on like social media and stuff. I guess, but I just don't think that these shows are like prestige enough or like even that good where the fact that they get released like once every week is really like a benefit. Like this does seem like a show that like would gain more from being able to be consumed like kind of rapidly and like given an opinion on. I feel like I just don't really find what they're doing to be like incredibly compelling that I need to like eke it out week by week. There's no mystery in the show. They dispense right away that there's like twins and they're like prominently in the show, like kind of a lot. So they're not really like concealing much. So I don't know. They do it for subscriptions and shit like that, I'm sure. So, whatever. Let them do what they want. But I mean, like I foresee myself maybe like checking out like one more episode and then I'll probably forget about it. And then I probably will not watch the rest of it. And I'll probably watch the EFAP coverage of it and then maybe EFAP TV episodes if they do that for it. And then that'll be like my that'll be like my exposure to the rest of the show because I'm not really hooked. And like I said, the force thing like really really bothers me. It's just like I said, it kind of is in my eyes. It kind of is just like homogenizing the force, right? Because like as so far as I can tell, there doesn't really seem to be a distinction between like evil force users and good force users, right? They all seem to have the access to the exact same like abilities. There isn't really anything that differentiates them other than like one is willing to do like unmoral things and the other one like wants to do like the right thing. That's kind of like the only differentiating factor. And so like Jedi's have kind of been like they've kind of been diluted down to like a person with a lightsaber and some mild telekinesis, and it's just really not that interesting. Like I feel like if I was gonna have a show with fucking four Jedi's in it already. Actually, there's been more Jedi's in it because Yort has like his own Padawan, but in the scenes that we've been in recently, we just like swapped his Padawan out for Saul's, and so, anyways, my point is that like none of these people so far they feel like distinct as people, but they don't really feel like distinct as Force users, and I don't know, maybe that's not fair to judge because like I don't know if I don't think like Yoda or like in the prequel trilogy, I don't remember if we saw like a bunch of Jedi's like using the Force and really like differentiating themselves in like how they used it. But that's the whole fucking point. Like we're in new fertile ground. You're doing a TV show. Like take these opportunities that like come to you. You could have been the first one to like really, really, really characterize people and have that be like expressed in the way that they like manifest the Force and stuff like that. And I'm just like not really seeing it. So um yeah, yeah, those are kind of my thoughts. That's how I feel about it after like two episodes. I didn't like hate it, um, but it's also like not really inspiring. Oh, and there were also like a couple things that like really really pissed me off, like at the end of the second episode where they have May trapped and she just like smoke clouds her way to safety, and it's like, dude, that's so fucking lame. She like looks at the ground and it's like, oh, this is like sand. So, and it's just so lame, especially because like, dude, I don't believe that a smoke screen could like protect a Jedi from other Jedi. Like I think that I'm like they'd immediately be able to detect the direction that she ran because she's a fucking Force user. So that is just like really, really silly to me. And the idea that like a cloud of dust is gonna like stop a Jedi, like shouldn't they have like a membrane of force like around them at like all times so that if someone does something like that, they're not getting like dust in their eyes and they're not like having trouble breathing afterwards or seeing or moving through it or anything like that. And that's what I mean, man. It's just like the Jedi are just so fucking lame in this show, man. Like they're just not cool at all. They're just guys with light swords that sometimes use telekinesis. Like sometimes you'll like fall to the ground and they'll like stop you from falling to the ground. But that's kind of it. It never really tries to be anything more than that. So it's kind of frustrating that like um you know it, like Star Wars has so many problems other than like the stories aren't good. And and what I mean by that is that like this shit is just so untapped. Like they have just done so little in exploring the various concepts and abilities and stuff like that. Like they're like of all the Star Wars stuff that we've gotten in all this time, there really aren't that many like great like Force v Force user fights and stuff that really like show what that stuff is like all about. Or even just like Force v non-Force people. Like we don't really get like great displays of like that kind of stuff either. So it just, I don't know, man. It just seems silly that here we are again and we're just kind of doing the same thing. Like they have fucking robes and they have a fucking light sword and they use telekinesis and that's kind of it. It's never really more than that. I mean, they were kind of showing like a couple of them like trying to like read minds and stuff like that. But again, like, that, which is fine. Like, don't do less of that, right? Like, that's good that you did it. But you're just really not showing me like anything like new or interesting. It's just kind of like and what I was trying to say about like okay, so I don't think I finished this thought. So like what I mean by like Star Wars doesn't have like it has like a story problem, but it also like has a problem where it just doesn't really do anything interesting with like its concepts. Like I think like one of my favorite parts about Andor is that it finally fleshes out like what the Empire looks like, not on a ship bridge. You know what I mean? Like not on the bridge of a star destroyer. Like we see some bureaucracy, we see some politicking with some different people. We see that there's protocol. We see that there is um you know directives and measures, and you have to get like authorization to like look at certain things, and you can get in trouble, right? You can lose your job, you can get penalized, like Karn did, um, things of that nature. And so it's kind of a problem that like Star Wars is like struggling to find its footing story wise when it still really hasn't nailed bringing the world to life beyond kind of the stuff that we've seen on like the big screen and stuff like that. So yeah, that's just kind of how I feel about all that. Um, so yeah, I figured I'd get some thoughts out there if anyone wanted to listen to this or some crap, because I'm sure there's going to be like content and crap coming out for it. But you know, it's kind of early, so here we go, and that's all. Thanks.